Good morning and welcome to this week's episode of Iconic Freedom, The Formula. Here we set a standard for accountability and responsibility, the ownership of your choices and your outcomes and everything that follows. Let each care for self and all will be cared for. So when I talk about the formula, we talk about that periodic chart that you see on the various websites that this is posted on, where you create those elements that come together and bring harmony to your life. And if one of those elements in your life is not working, then you extract it and you reevaluate it and, again, bring that harmony to your life. This week's episode, we're going to be talking about something that I think quietly drives a tremendous amount of human behavior. Chasing approval, chasing your validation, chasing reassurance, chasing attention, love, acceptance, your worthiness through performance. And eventually, if someone becomes honest enough with themselves, a deeper question begins to emerge. What changes when you stop chasing entirely? Because I think many people will spend years believing that the pursuit creates a connection, that if they just say the right thing, if they could just be enough or give enough or prove enough or sacrifice enough, that they'll finally feel secure. But I think pretty often chasing just reveals something very different. I think it reveals that there's an internal instability more than a genuine connection. And I think one of the hardest realizations in life is understanding that many people were probably conditioned, I would say very early, to believe that love had to be earned. And, maybe earned through behavior. When you did the right thing, you did the right thing and all the praise that you get, or through achievement or attractiveness, usefulness, emotional caretaking, compliance, and becoming like whatever was necessary to receive approval. I mean, that could be a bazillion different things, right? But they grow up unconsciously carrying this internal belief. If I can just become enough, I'll finally feel safe. I'll feel complete. I'll feel at peace. And I think it's kind of important to understand because many adults are still chasing the validation they never received as children. I'm not going to get into all of that psychology mumbo jumbo because that's what it is. But it does mean that the pursuit isn't always romantic. Sometimes it's historical. As I've said before, your fear is not logical, it's historical. And when someone's self-worth becomes dependent on external validation or attention begins functioning almost like emotional oxygen, there's a problem. That's a red flag, folks. Silence starts to feel, I think, threatening to people. And distance, can feel very personal and certainly can create anxiety, perhaps. And rejection most definitely will feel catastrophic for most people. And it's not because the moment, I would say, itself is truly catastrophic, but I think it's because the nervous system starts to interpret the disconnection as danger. And this is where people often confuse intensity with connection. But anxiety is not intimacy, and emotional obsession is not love, and panic is not passion. Sometimes what people call chemistry is actually the nervous system activation tied to the instability. And that changes the way you begin seeing relationships entirely, because there's a very different energy between genuine attraction and desperation. Desperation will say, oh, choose me, so I can feel okay. Grounded attraction will say, I appreciate connection, but I remain whole regardless of you. And that's a completely different posture towards life, right? And people feel that difference, even when nobody says it out loud, because the energy of chasing often pushes away the very thing that it's trying to secure. And what do you think that reason is? Well, because people can feel when they're being emotionally used, right, for validation. They're being kidnapped or hijacked into, I have to constantly be reassuring you, of you in my life or this, that, or the other thing in order for you to feel comfortable. People can feel when someone needs them to stabilize their identity, or to soothe an insecurity, to provide a worth, to eliminate loneliness, and then to regulate fear. Sometimes I've talked to people, I'll have conversation with people, and they will say something that is searching. I'm trying to think of what that word would be. Is they'll say something when they're trying to get you to respond some way, and they want you to provide an answer for them that they themselves will not give. They want to fish for a compliment, or they want to fish for a secure answer and all that kind of stuff. And eventually, I think a relationship just stops feeling like a connection, and it starts feeling like emotional responsibility. Suddenly, I or you or whatever have to be emotionally responsible for that person. And I think many people become exhausted because they spend years trying to prove themselves worthy of love. Trying to convince someone to choose them, or trying to negotiate a consistency, or earn honesty, or secure just basic respect. And I think over time, they slowly abandon themselves in pursuit of being wanted. But healthy connection rarely requires constant convincing. And maybe that's where this week's anchor thought comes in. What's meant for you rarely requires self-abandonment to keep. What's meant for you rarely requires self-abandonment to keep. Now, that doesn't mean that, life requires no effort. It doesn't mean relationships never require communication and, growth and all that. But there's a difference between mutual effort and emotional exhaustion. And there's a difference between what I would say is a healthy pursuit and anxious chasing rooted in fear. Because I think when someone feels internally unstable, they often pursue harder the more disconnected they feel. The more texting, the more explaining, the more proving, the more overthinking, the more emotional pursuit. I texted you, why didn't you answer me? Well, it's only been 30 seconds. I know, but why didn't you do it right away? And honestly, it's as if enough effort can force certainty into existence. You're trying to get the approval, but this peace of mind that you seek, it does not emerge from forcing a connection. Peace will emerge when self-worth is no longer outsourced. Peace emerges when self-worth no longer is outsourced. And I think that's where many people begin changing profoundly. Not because they become cold, or they stop caring, or they become emotionally unavailable. But when they stop negotiating their worth as an individual through the attention of others. When they stop performing for validation. When they stop chasing people who require them to abandon themselves in order to maintain a connection. And I think ironically, when someone no longer chases validation, they often become far more attractive as family, as friends, as, partners, whatever. Because grounded people invite connection. Desperate people seek emotional rescue. And you can feel it, folks. You can tell when people are doing that, and they're playing subtle little games to try to manipulate something, whether fishing for a compliment or fishing for reassurance. And frankly, when I've been involved with people at work and such that do that, I just simply don't respond. I literally don't say anything. I just let it sit there. And then they have to come up with whatever the next thing to say is, or I just walk away. And it doesn't mean that someone becomes detached from humanity, or that they stop loving or stop caring, or they stop desiring a connection. It simply means that their identity is no longer collapses in the absence of attention. And I think that changes everything, because maybe maturity in relationships isn't learning how to chase harder. Maybe it's learning how to remain whole whether someone stays or leaves. And I'm going to say it's not a maybe. I'm going to say it's a reality. Because what I observe is that is the case. Is that when you become a whole individual and you are interacting with other whole individuals, people don't worry about stay or leave. And not because they don't care or you don't care, because your worth no longer depends on being chosen. And I think that's the true end of chasing. It's not the end of love, it's not the end of connection, but it's the end of abandoning yourself in pursuit of validation. You can try your entire life with someone, and some people do this in relationships. I've seen people do it for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, that their whole worth is external and it is outsourced rather than it having been internal all along. And to understand, I exist without you and you exist without me, and that's okay. And I think that's the part that becomes the end of abandoning yourself in that pursuit of validation. Okay, hit that like button if you would. Share it with your family and friends. You never know how it might support them in their endeavor. All the fun links are below, and if you're inclined, feel free to subscribe on Buzzsprout. I am on X and Truth Social, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. The link to my newest book, The Christmas Cookie, Stories from the Counter, is listed below. I'd be grateful and honored if you chose to pick up a copy. It's a collection of heartwarming stories that I quietly say unfold the very principles that we talk about here each week. And until next time, stay sharp, stay sovereign, and as always, remember, let each care for self, and all will be cared for. Make it a great week.